Hello, and welcome to the pilot episode of what I'm going to call Megaphone, which is a program made by a minority for minorities. I'm your host, Jay. I'm a trans man from Lancashire. My pronouns, he/they. I'm a student mental health nurse, and I feel like such a lucky boy to have this opportunity to be able to talk to all of you guys today. A little bit about me. So my career so far has mainly been dominated by research around the gender diverse community. So that's who we are, what affects us, and what can the solutions be to all of these issues that we face. So my community is currently the subject of social persecution, which has real life implications for each and every single one of us. My own experiences growing up have not been positive, and I've had my own battles with mental health that meant that I might not have been here today to talk to you about all of these different issues and do my part in improving societal conditions for minority groups. So now I spend my days figuring out ways we can make change and begin to change perceptions around gender identity to essentially prevent young people today from experiencing the same things that I did. I believe that the persecution my community faces stems from a lack of information around the history of gender identity, because we've always been here, we're just not in any of the history books. And this can be attributed to things like Section 28 coming into place in the 80s, which prevented the promotion of homosexuality in educational institutions, and also cultural values like the nuclear family setup, which came into place and was popularised around about the 50s, which we're only really just beginning to reframe and break out of. So there's still some mileage there to be achieved there, let's be honest. But that being said, what better way is there to kick off Lancashire and South Cumbria's first ever minority orientated podcast than to welcome Chris Oliver, who is CEO of the Trust. Amazing. He'll be answering some questions in the next few minutes. But before we begin, I just want to clarify that this podcast will not solely focus on issues around gender diversity. There are also many conversations to be had around the topic of intersectionality itself. So that is the genetic, racial, and socioeconomic factors that disadvantage people at different rates across the globe. And we're watching the impact of it unfold in different parts of the world day by day. My aim is to educate and inform listeners about intersectionality, as these factors can all impact our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being, but they're not widely acknowledged within society. So sit down, chill out, go grab a brew, and get ready. Chris, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too, Jay.
Likewise. Thank you very much for coming today. Really appreciate your time. So I'm going to blitz through 12 questions with you. I'm going to try not to grill you too hard.
It's okay.
But I've been burning to ask these questions for a while. So let's do it, shall we? So question number one, I suppose, is would you say that the Trust has a responsibility to educate the general public on minority issues?
Yeah, so I would say yes. So I think, we have a huge responsibility, not just for the communities that we serve, but for the colleagues that work with us. So we've got just over 8,000 colleagues that work in Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust. So I think we've got a huge obligation to make sure that we're having honest and supportive conversations across our workforce. But absolutely, we need to be out in communities. We need to hear what people are saying. We need to support them. People approach and need our support in different ways and at different times in their life. And I think, that bit you talked about there about different backgrounds and different socioeconomic backgrounds, how we tailor our support has to be different in different parts of our community, and for different age ranges in the people that we're there to support.
Because there's different generational values that can also come into play as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think of my own journey and some of the things. I came out quite late in life as a gay man, but I know if I'd have tried to have the conversations I maybe could have had earlier on in my life, I would have had different reactions from my parents than I did when I came out later on in life. So I think I would hope that through all our colleagues that are out there supporting people for whatever part of mental illness or that they may have, that they take it's about that person-centered approach. We talk a lot about that, but for me that is that's so important. And making sure that you put the patient, the service user at the heart of what you do, and really listen to them, and listen to what support they need that's tailored to them.
Yeah, and how in terms of person-centered approach, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, so we've just launched a new model of care, so it's called Dialogue Plus, and that is really about understanding what would help that individual, understanding what their preferences are, what they think that their road to recovery might look like. Really trying to understand what the triggers are. I think for me, it's taking the time and we talked a bit about before about where you've been working on some of the wards as a student nurse, and that having that time is so important, and we know that we don't always give our colleagues that time. We know demands really increased, and nationally there is a workforce shortage, and we're doing some great stuff of trying to recruit additional colleagues and really having positive results in retaining colleagues. So I want to get to a place where everyone who comes to work feels like they're given the time and the space to really make that difference with their service user or their patient.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, that's why we're all here. Is because we're caring people, isn't it? Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. Those are values that we need to maintain in any way that we can. I think, yeah. So the second question that I was gonna ask you is going to be a sort of follow on from that. I think in terms of how people access that kind of information and where they can access that information. So, like, what kinds of resources are out there for LSCFT staff that can help them understand and begin to address intersectional issues that minority groups face? Yeah.
So I think I was really proud last year that the Trust launched its first Inclusion and Belonging report. So it's a fantastic read. If you haven't read it, it's on our website. And for me, that's a real bringing together of our journey of equality. We had our first inclusive conference and belonging conference, and I say belonging because I think that is really important. We talk about equality and diversity, but to talk about belonging, where I think belonging and feel comfortable to be in a space is really important.
Absolutely.
Whether you're that person delivering care or whether you're that person receiving care. So colleagues can go to our intranet page. We also got the Hub of Hope, so we're linked in with Chasing the Stigma, which is a national charity, and on their page, which we did a podcast only last month with Jake, who's the CEO of Chasing the Stigma. And Hub of Hope is you type in your postcode, you type in some of the support that you might be looking for, and it will bring up a range of support. That might be stuff that NHS provides, it might be support that's out there in the voluntary sector. I think there's also our staff networks. So we're really, I chair the Inclusion Council, so we meet every other month as a trust around inclusion. We start off with colleague story, and then we get updates from our staff networks. So each of the networks is chaired by a person of that lived experience, and they've got an exec sponsor, and that was it was really key for me that the execs didn't lead the network, but they should be there as a sponsor to move blockages out the way, to make sure that if there's an issue, it's getting heard. And so for me, our staff networks are so important for us. So whether you represent to a community that one of our networks represents, and we've got 7 in the organisation, or whether you want to go and find out more information about LGBTQ+ or disability, that you've got that area where you can go. It's a safe space, and there are people there that will always help you on your journey of understanding. And I think that journey of understanding is not necessarily easy for everybody. So I think making sure we've got a safe space and wraparound support is really key. And we've got an amazing equality, diversity and inclusion team, I think, here at the Trust. then when we go for people that are out in the community, of course, you've got our website, you've got there are Hub of Hope is a really good place. There are other forums like that, and I suppose it's we're really investing in mental health in schools teams. I think we've seen on the back of the pandemic a huge increase in demand for children's mental health.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in the NHS we talk about that starting well, and I think for me that's the bit that we really need to get right. If we provide that support, and young people know where to go to access that support, and they don't worry and they don't bottle things up. I've got a 10-year-old lad myself, and I always say to him, just talk. So, and I would hope he would always be able to talk to me, but if he didn't, to make sure that he knows forums, organisations where he can get that support is really key.
Absolutely,
and I think,
absolutely.
That visibility piece you can't underestimate. And I remember going to a conference years ago now, and someone saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And it really stuck with me. And so I think visibility is so powerful that if you are struggling through your journey in life, and it might be that you're within the LGBTQ plus community, seeing someone that is like you that has made that journey, I think just gives you that confidence that it can be done.
It gives you a sense of hope as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to be necessarily easy, and I'm 44 this year, and there are still things that I think I shouldn't have to be thinking about this, and yet I still do. And so I think it's never going to be easy, but seeing it does give you that hope.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think as well, just circling back to being able to signpost to places appropriately, and talking about the lived experiences within networks as well. I think that's it's really important part, and just really drives home that sort of person-centeredness of it all. It just avoids people essentially making assumptions about why people have made certain choices in life, because I think whilst we are all responsible for our own decisions, I think there are also driving factors behind those decisions that are stereotypically overlooked, really. And I think the less sort of people you have to relate to about the different issues that you face can also be reasons that you end up making those decisions. Mainly to protect your sense of self and things like that. So it's quite important really to be able to have those different support networks, know where they are, and to be able to access them when you need them. And especially to do with young people. I mean, like, we'll only just be really in the next sort of in the next couple of years seeing the actual impact of the pandemic and the impact that it's had on people's mental well-being. It was because I think that was the first time we actually experienced as a society mass social isolation, and how that can there were studies before that actually highlighted what loneliness can do to a person, but to be able to see that happen in real time to a lot of different people,
and a whole generation as well, wasn't it?
A whole generation, and while I think there were a lot of different things that sort of happened in that time, really, but I think that was one of the major things that sort of stuck out the most in terms of how dystopian things felt. Just not even being able to feel like you could talk to somebody on the street, and different things like that. And question number 3, I suppose, would be, so what is Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust's 5-year plan in improving services for gender diverse people?
Okay, so we've got a really exciting strategy, I think. So our vision at the organisation is to be the best. And we talked a lot about this as an exec team and as a board. What does the best? Do you ever get to be the best? Should you always just be improving? And I think that's right. You should always try and improve. But for me, I want whatever you need this organisation to provide, it needs to provide the best. Now, we've clearly got a journey to go on that. We've come on in the last 4 years considerably, but we've still got a lot more to go. I think around our whole diverse population and that intersectionality is, if I look at our quadruple aim, so it's kind of like it's a fancy term for a bit of a framework for delivering a strategy. So, improving health. So what are we doing in communities to improve people's mental health? And that can be at crisis point, but it can also be, at a more lower level of mental health intervention. And then what we're doing for better care, so improving, whilst people are in our services, how we're making sure that it's person-centred, we're listening to them, we're hearing the journey that they're on, and tailoring that support. And then we've got the whole joy and pride at work. So when you're in work, are you able to bring your whole self to work? I'm a huge believer of, if you bring your whole self to work, however you present, you provide, you feel better yourself, and you provide better care as a result. And then the fourth quadrant is around the money, but for me it's making sure that whilst we're absolutely committed on that journey of improvement, there's a foundation of inclusivity, and if people don't feel they're heard, or don't feel that their community is recognised, would they feel that they could approach us for support? I think that would be really difficult.
I think a lot of, so just to sort of interject there, because this is actually somewhere I've been doing quite a lot of research on. So it's not just it's not singular to the UK. It's a global issue in terms of LGBT people, and the further you fall into that bracket, the harder it is essentially to be able to approach healthcare staff. About specific issues, because one of the major barriers is always having to play the role of educator, and then I think there's the secondary and tertiary elements to that as well that just sort of come with worrying about people's responses, different personal values that might impact the way that a person receives the information that you're telling them, and like the anticipation of being rejected essentially is a major reason as to why a lot of different groups would choose to sort of disengage from health services, which it's not helping anything, because then we don't learn anything either, because they're not approaching us.
And and I come back to that bit of that visibility, and as an organisation we started with and a lot of the NHS went to the Pride badge, and then we've moved on to the Progress badge, because for me it is about that intersectionality. People aren't isn't a solo. We're made up of multifaceted dimensions, and I think for me it's making sure that we recognise that, and some of the I think that tolerance, we need to be more tolerant and supportive as a society. I would hope that people would reach out to this organisation if they felt they needed support, and that they would be welcomed and treated for the individual that they are, and the positives that they bring as that individual. And as hard as it might be for them to reach out for support, the success stories and the recovery that people go through with a journey with support is fantastic. So I would always say, please don't suffer in silence. Please reach out, and if you don't get the reaction you want from wherever, whatever port of support, then don't accept that.
Absolutely,
keep asking for that support, and reach out, because it's that purpose about being validated.
Absolutely.
And worth is really important.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, really, because absolutely, most definitely, we should all be advocating for ourselves. I think as well, just to jump on the back of that, there's an element of so as nurses, I say that in a very loose term because I haven't actually qualified yet. But it's written in, it's embedded into the code to act as an advocate for the person that is at the centre of your care, and to be understanding, to be open, and to be good at listening, in essence. So if you don't feel like you're getting the right kind of support from any other kind of service, you should be able to at least engage with your local nurse, which is a fantastic thing. So question 4 is, what steps do you think we can take to reduce the impact of things like heteronormative practice within our frontline and specialist services? So, like, just before we answer that question, I'm just going to go over heteronormative practice refers to, if you remember me talking about the sort of nuclear family setup, it's the assumption that everybody is cisgendered and straight. So then this is the uphill battle that a lot of LGBT people will end up facing, because they have to break down that stereotype to even be seen by that clinician in that sense. So in terms of when it comes to answering certain clinical questions, I think the most recent one that I heard of that I can bring to mind would be to do with just around like sexual health and having like sexual partners. So asexual people, some might have a few, there might be some who have none. But then the doctor, the general reaction from clinicians tends to be one of, there must be somebody somewhere down the line. But that asexual person who identifies as asexual has said that they don't have any partners. So then it's tackling that element of confusion, which over time, with a lot of different, if you're experiencing that every time you're trying to access healthcare, really grinds down your sense of self, really, your self-esteem, your sort of your drive to keep on trying to access those same services. So what do you think can be done to tackle heteronormative practice within services?
I think it starts with training. So I think it starts with how we can break down those barriers internally as an organisation. So, visibility again. We do a lot of, and our recruitment is we do more. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the strapline as part of the recruitment. But the different images that we present as part of that recruitment campaign are really important. We chose to make sure that they really truly represent our workforce colleagues, and that it's not necessarily everybody in a clinical uniform. It's good to get clinical teams on those posters recruiting, helping us to recruit, but people see them as normal as how they are outside of work, maybe, and that I think we might come on to that a bit later about in professional and personal, and how do you split them. So for me, I think it's how we train. So we develop people. We've got leadership programs in the organisation to absolutely, I think celebrate the diversity is really important.
Very important, yeah.
I think. I think you need to keep doing it. I think in my own journey, if I talk to people and mention Henry, the first question is, "What does your wife do?" So I think that's a reaction that has been built up through years. You talked about going back to the 1950s. That's I think is, but I'm really conscious that then I correct that, because I think it's easy to stay quiet in that space. But by correcting it, you're reinforcing that actually it's absolutely fine. So I think for me that's a big thing. It's around the training. It's around allyship. Really celebrating allyship and realising, I think, that allyship isn't one of the big things that we learned through our allyship program here, that really I took away, is that I can't just say I'm an ally and I am an ally. You have to be accepted to be an ally. And I think that's really, that understanding your unconscious bias through that is really important. And that as we grow up, we get an understanding of certain norms, and I think through your life then they change, and it's it's been a fascinating journey for me personally, and we've seen a huge number of colleagues in the organisation go on that as well. So I think talking about it, promoting it, not shying away from it. So starting to look at how we look at data differently in the organisation. We're not doing enough on how we cross-cut our waiting lists by certain demographics, and intersectionality is a huge part in that, and somewhere where I think we'll get to as an organisation, and probably wider society needs to get to it as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there is still quite a bit of mileage to be covered in terms of sort of deconstructing certain things that are it's just well ingrained within society. But I think the right kinds of conversations are happening now, and I think it's just a case of, I think there's also the flip side of it as well, where we need to understand that people can be clumsy with phraseology, and they might not always get the right kinds of words. So it is just about being able to keep that in the back of your mind when you're trying to engage with people that you might not be as familiar with. That like behind all of the computers and the numbers and the telephones are people that want to help, but they don't necessarily know how to. I think it's important to keep that kind of stuff in mind really when you're trying to navigate frontline services especially. Question 5. So, are there any resources out there to help parents support their child in expressing their gender?
Yeah, so I come back to Hub of Hope again. But if you look at some of the national charities, they do some great work in this space, and NSPCC, our teams would look to support with a range of both fundamental NHS services, but also those wider services. And I think, are there enough? Are they easily accessible? Is a different question. How do children access them that don't have access to laptops, to Wi-Fi? I think then you look at our geography in Lancs and South Cumbria. We've got quite urban areas, we've got some real rural areas. How that brings a whole different dynamic to access and support, and having the availability to know where to go to. So I think there's so much more we can do in that space really. And I think for us as an organisation, it's how we get out and we make it accessible, make it normal to talk about things. It's so probably more to go in that space. Yeah.
I think there, I use this phraseology quite a lot, but in terms of mileage, there is quite a bit there in terms of just being able to, because at the end of the day, it's still quite, I think the publicity around gender diversity is very new. So it's still something that services are trying to catch up with and integrate into their framework. And we've talked about heteronormative practices and how we're trying to deconstruct all of that and rebuild it at the same time. So we're trying to just work our way around different issues.
But it's fantastic to be having these conversations, isn't it, with services? I think it's a real positive step forward.
Absolutely it is, and it could. I'm incredibly hopeful for the future. I think we've covered. I think generally, in terms of level of self-acceptance, well, not levels of self-acceptance, but acceptance in society in general, is the trend would suggest that there is a greater level of acceptance of gender diverse people in society. I think that there is a flip side of that in terms of like when you experience sort of different like economic crises and things like that, minority groups tend to get targeted a lot more. They tend to be the focal point of a lot more bouts of violence and things like that. But then, I think in terms of institutions supporting these different groups, while they might not understand them yet, there is an element of there's a bridge that's been built there in terms of support, which is it's really reassuring. Question 6. This is the one that I've been dying to ask you. So, do you think that GPs should support gender clinics by prescribing and monitoring hormone replacement therapies?
so it's probably not my area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something about it being a specific relationship between that GP, the child, and
Mm-hmm.
either the family member or the carer.
Mm-hmm.
What I suppose I'd want is that we have commissioning pathways that are evidence-based,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that they are funded, and that they are there's an awareness of those evidence-based pathways that any clinician would be aware of and would support children through that transition and through their support with their identity. But it's probably not my area of true expertise in that sense, if that helps, Jay.
Yeah, no, it is quite. I think it's quite, because it can be quite a controversial subject to sort of approach, especially when it comes to young people. Like my own personal beliefs around that whole thing are necessary, that people might not always feel the need to medically transition if they're allowed to explore their gender freely in a safe environment. They might, like they could go all around the houses and then centre back at gender neutral.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of friends that would say that. My own personal journey with it, I went through a bunch of different identities. I made sure that being a trans man was the absolute last thing on my mind before deciding to make a medical transition. So I think there's a lot of different avenues that kind of need to be, so that it can be quite complex, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, so that is a difficult question.
Yeah, no,
but thank you for your answer nonetheless. Yeah. So number 7, I think this is where I was like, I'll give him a bit of a break now. Yeah. So what made you choose a health orientated career path?
So I did the apprenticeship route, so I left school and did apprenticeships. I was always in public sector, so I was in housing association, local authority, and then went across into the NHS. Was always just intrigued by it. Got into the NHS and just loved it. And I've loved, I think, that bit because I'm not clinical by background, but working alongside clinicians and making a real difference. And I truly believe that whatever your role in the NHS is, you make a real difference.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like how I got into the NHS. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Best decision I ever did.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the exact same way. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Yeah. Genuinely, it's such a fantastic workforce, and I think it's filled with incredible working hard people who, and I think sometimes especially frontline services, it can be quite a thankless job. Yeah. But these people get out of bed every day and turn up to work,
And a huge variation of roles. So if you are looking for, there's massive careers in the NHS, and I started in a commissioning function in an organisation that did commissioning, and then I went into an acute hospital, and then I now in a mental health and community integrated trust, and yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think there's so many different opportunities to be able to diversify your experience as well. I think, so like if you enter down sort of one pathway, the way that you can just grow as a person, just being able to have access to a career like this, it's a fantastic opportunity. So if you've got that little niggle at the back of your head thinking, what should I do?
And loads of ways to enter. That's it. From apprenticeships to whichever way, there's tons of ways to enter.
It's a fantastic institution to be a part of. So I guess following on from that, you said you'd only your career in healthcare has been it's over the last sort of 4 years.
Well, 4 years in this organisation, so 22 years, I think, in the NHS.
22 years in the NHS.
Yeah, scary.
So,
feel very old now. There you go, Jay. Thanks for that.
But so over 22 years, then you must have seen a lot of change. Like, what was the most that stood out to you?
Oh God, there's tons, isn't there? I think there's been huge advancements in treatment and things that we've seen. I think there's been, we've seen changes in demand patterns. You mentioned the pandemic before and the impact that had. I think if there's one thing that I'm really, I suppose is that cultural bit about that compassionate, about working in an area that you really can be your whole self, is so important. It's so important for me, but I know it's so important for a lot of people. And so yeah, that's the bit that I think I'm really proud about the NHS, is that's where we're going, and especially hopefully within this organisation that's starting to really ripple through.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of strong characters, I think, that work within our services, and I wouldn't change them for the world. I genuinely wouldn't. We are running out of time, so I think I'm going to have to just do a bit of chopping with some of these questions. But I think one of the things that I really, really wanted to ask you, and I think is the most important one out of these ones. 2 more questions. So, do you think it's possible to fully separate personal and professional identity?
I'd probably say no, because I think I am. Not for me. I would really struggle with that. I think to be authentic, to lead authentically, you have to be yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say that what you see here is what you see on a Saturday when I'm standing on a frozen rugby pitch with Henry. That is, it's the same. Yeah.
I think I would agree with you there. I think there was, I think, in some of my previous work experience outside of anything healthcare orientated, it's been very much a case of you've got your life outside.
Yeah.
Don't bring it through these doors. But when we've just been discussing like the difficulties that people face around intersectionality and things like that, I think it's quite it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to separate.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to acknowledge like different aspects of life and how that can impact your work as well, and have your employer respond to that effectively. I think that's a really important part
100%.
of a good working career. Do you not?
Yeah,
would you not say?
I think I probably am. If you think in those 20 odd years in the NHS, I'm totally different now than where I started, and I think the experiences you go through in life shape who you are. Why would you not want to bring that into work? And
absolutely,
you spend a lot of time in work as well, don't you? So I think being in work probably changes who you are outside as well. I think it's a bit of a melee of
absolutely.
Stuff. Yeah,
you've got to be able to integrate the two over time. I think.
Yeah, totally.
And the final question before we zip off is how can we improve communication between the health service and service users?
Oh, good choice. So I think there's one about comms, making sure we're getting out there, making sure people know how to access services to start with, and then when people do access the services, that we listen, that we truly listen, and that we really make our response person-centred is key for me. And but I think that getting out into communities and doing it authentically is not easy, and we need to keep doing that. And and our whole strategy is about transitioning into that community sector and how we get and become one with the community. So you talk about mental health care as you would talk about physical health care, and it becomes normal, and people talk about it normally. And for me, that would be my biggest ask, I think.
That's brilliant. I just want to take this chance to just thank you so much for coming in and chatting to me, and just
pro at this. Just fantastic.
It's been great. It's been a great opportunity. Thank you so much, and just the fact that you were here to be able to kick off the pilot episode. I was like, when I got the email through, I was like, "What? This is mad! Is this actually happening?" Honestly, I couldn't. I nearly
really
fell
interesting. Really interesting. So well, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for coming on the show. And like I said, I've been dying to ask these questions for a while now, so it's good to get that off my chest.
Best of luck with the rest of the podcast. And I love that courage to change on your t-shirt. I think that's spot on.
That's it. I think because it does. I think when you're faced with a lot of social changes and things like that, when it comes to undertaking a transition process, I think I feel like every single one of us is more than brave for doing that. So like when I wear stuff like this, it's more just to reiterate that fact, is that it does take courage to change. It's not a case of we're just acting on a whim. We're navigating a lot of difficult things just to be ourselves, really. So but yeah, Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. That's all for today,
Cheers.
people. Thank you.
Thank
Take it
you.
easy.
Bye-bye.